Hello, welcome back to our bookshop in Tring. I'm Ben Moorhouse. So we've got another author interview today, and we're talking to Ian Stone. Ian is a very well-known comedian around the UK. He's often on Fighting Talk on Radio 5 and often at the Comedy Store, but he's also written a book, To Be Someone, a memoir about one teenager's obsession with the Jam. So, and particularly with Paul Weller. Anyway, I had a good chat with Ian last week. Do enjoy the interview. Hello, Ian. Hello, Ian. Welcome to our bookshop YouTube channel. This is your rather wonderful book. Well done on writing this.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you. It took a while, but we got there in the end.
To Be Someone. So I ran into you on, you may not remember, I ran into you on Embankment about this time last year. You were just finishing your radio show.
Yes.
And I was walking to one of my first meetings to start planning for our book festival we ran last year.
Yeah.
And at the time we spoke, and you said this would be out, and all the plans were for you to come to our book festival in November, but clearly that's not going to happen now.
No.
So
the thing was, weirdly enough, this time last year, I actually got sacked from my radio show before I went to Glastonbury. I left on the Wednesday morning after doing the breakfast show, and the plan was to drive down there. And as I left, they went, "Don't come back." And I went, "Okay." And then I went to Glastonbury, and for reasons that it doesn't really matter, I don't need to go into. But I went to Glastonbury and I ran into Andy Smart, who's a comic friend of ours. And I said, he goes, the first thing he said to me, he goes, "I love your radio show." And I said, "I've just got sacked." And he went, "Come and have a cocktail." On a Wednesday afternoon. I went, "Excellent, I'm home." So that was what happened this time last year. But yes,
Brilliant.
Here we are.
So you're doing no radio now at all?
Not at the moment. No, that radio station is no longer. I actually went back to work for them. They decided that they made a massive error. But the radio station now is no longer exists. So at the moment, right now I'm an author. Weirdly.
And a brilliant comedian, I might add. Although you're not doing a lot of stand-up. It's are you doing any of the digital stand-up that's being thrown around?
I've done the odd bit, little bits and pieces, but yeah. Right now, I'm thinking about the book, and I'm doing a bit of telly and a sports telly thing. So I haven't done a lot of gigs, but we'll see how that goes in the next few months. If things quieten down, then I'll be back doing some digital gigs. But it's not the same. I mean, we all know it's not the same, but it's really not the same.
I know. I've not given the idea of trying to do it the smallest of thought, really, because you just can't create the same energy and the same atmosphere.
No, you definitely can't. But there are a lot of unemployed comedians out there who, and aside from driving our families mad, you know, with the nonsense that we come out with, it's just, I don't know. I miss it. I mean, I really miss it. The longest I went before this period, I've been doing it almost 30 years. The longest I went was 12 days. It's been about 3.5 months.
You do, in your book, you do reference the importance that the ability to be able to jump up on stage and vent your spleen on subjects that are current is very important to you particularly. I mean, there are a lot of comedians who have their material, but you're very much more into the current affairs and sort of extracting what you can out of things that you don't feel happy about, I suppose.
Yeah. I mean, there are things that happen almost every day. Boris Johnson was doing press-ups on the front of the newspaper the other day. I mean, if you can't spend 5 minutes moaning about that in front of an appreciative audience, or even an unappreciative audience, it doesn't really matter. But I prefer them when they're laughing. But there are things going on in the world at the moment. Donald Trump, you know, Bolsonaro, whatever is happening, and the coronavirus thing, that I have, I suppose, funny opinions on that I like to share. And I haven't got a chance.
Right, let's talk book, To Be Someone. Now, let's talk about what's the background to you deciding to write a book in the first place, and who assisted with your with the process.
Well, my partner Rosie, who I've been with her a long time. She was the one who basically said I should do stand-up all those years ago. She said to me about 3.5 years ago, you should write a book about the Jam, is what she said, and about growing up in that period. And I didn't take a lot of convincing. It's a big thing to write a book, but the truth was, I've got a lot of stories and I love the band, and it seemed like a good fit. So I'm friends with a book agent. I met him through other writers and people that I know, and I suggested it to him. He liked the idea, and we put together a pitch, and we sent it to publishers, and they all said no. So he then took it to Unbound, who are a crowdfunding publisher. Still a publisher, but they're a crowdfunding publisher. And they said, if you can raise £15,000, we'll do the book. And in the book you've got in your hand, at the back of the book, has the names of all the people who contributed money. And there's loads of them, aren't there? I mean, it's
page after page. It's incredible, and a lot of very familiar comedic friends, no doubt.
I think a lot of people looked at it and thought, yeah, you know what, this idea works. Essentially, you've got to get your head around the fact that you're not asking people for money, although you are asking them for money, but you're asking them for an investment in the idea, and in the idea of the book, and in you as a writer. And if enough people think that it's a good idea and they like the idea of the book, they give you money. And if enough people give you money, you get to write it.
I have to say, keep in mind, I run a bookshop, run a book festival, but I only put my head above the parapet, this time last year, really. So I am totally green to this whole thing. So the idea of Unbound is new to me. So this is the first time I've witnessed it, and I just think brilliant. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I do like it as well. It's a beautiful concept that people buy into the idea of it, and they help you with it. And then because the number of people who've tweeted me pictures in the last few days when their books have arrived, look at my name in the book. And how cool, that's a lovely thing, isn't it? To be part of a creative process, especially, and I'm not saying this lightly, the book, when it arrived, I think it's a thing of beauty. I genuinely do. I look at it and I think the cover's great, and I love how it's come out. And I think people are, yes, you're showing it to me now, I think people are genuinely pleased when they get it, and I hope they are, certainly.
And Paul Weller, who is the object of desire, I say, or object of the book.
Adoration.
Adoration, yeah. He seems a bit of a fan of it as well. I really like this book, quote unquote. I've forgotten how shit it was in the 70s.
Yeah. Well, it was very funny. A mutual friend of ours, and when I say ours, I mean me and Paul Weller. I said to him, can you get the book to Paul? This is about a year ago, maybe, when it was still in a draft stage, but coming along. And he got the book to Paul. And then a week later, Paul phoned me up. He phoned me up. I mean, not out of the blue, because he'd been sending texts to our friend saying, I love your mate's book, I'm going to phone him up. So he phoned me up and he went, Ian, it's Paul Weller. And I wanted to go, I know, because I'd recognise your voice anywhere. But I sort of acted all, oh, hey, Paul, how are you? Yeah, Paul Weller phones me every week. And then that's the first thing he said. He said, I really like your book. I'd forgotten how shit it was in the 70s. And I laughed and I said, can I use that as a quote on the front cover? And he said, yes, no problem. And then we chatted for half an hour about those times. And I've met him a couple of times since then. We had a bite to eat together. It's an unforeseen but lovely byproduct of doing this, really.
Brilliant. I think to say you've now got Paul Weller's phone number on your phone, that's how cool is that?
It is quite cool, but the truth was, when we met and we chatted as artists, you know what I mean? As opposed to me going, I love your work and I was a big fan, and he's like, yeah, do you want me to sign something? It's a bit more, he's asking me about the comedy world and he's genuinely interested, and we keep trying to arrange when he comes to see me, but that's not going to happen for a while.
No.
So yeah, having Paul do that, and also, by the way, having Phil do the illustrations as well. Phil Jupiter's.
Yes,
we all know.
I was gonna raise that.
They're beautiful, aren't they?
They're fantastic. Yeah. They're fantastic, and you sort of use the mechanism of the illustrations in conjunction with things we didn't have in the 70s, as before you then move into the next chapter. And there's a long list of brilliant things that we didn't have in the 70s. Which keep in mind, I'm 6 years younger than you.
Yeah.
So I missed all of this, and in fact, my knowledge of the 70s is fairly limited, to be brutally honest.
Well, this might help.
It would absolutely. I mean, obviously, I was kind of aware of it all anyway, but it's just brilliant. So
I mean, I guess, Ben, these things we didn't have in the 70s with the little illustrations, to a certain extent. Do you remember in Seinfeld when between scenes they would have that bass sting, you know, that 4-note bass sting, and it just moves you along to the next scene. And I sort of saw these the same way, little stand-up-y bits of writing and funny cartoons that Phil has drawn.
I was going to show one just to the camera, actually, just so this is Phil's. That's a rather lovely piece. Do you recognise
Old Ian and Young Ian is what it's meant to be.
It's basically Old Ian and Young Ian talking to each other, comparing the 70s and now. And obviously, I mean, this one's about there's a fourth TV channel back in the 70s. Wow.
Yes. Well, and the other thing that I loved about what he did, Phil, were the illustrations on the centre pages as well, because for any Jam fans, they are exact copies of Jam album and single covers, which I just think they're gorgeous what he's done, and the colours are beautiful, those. And it's me and Paul giving me careers advice as to what I should do, essentially. And I mean, really, to have those recreated, I've got some of the originals here at home, and I think they're absolutely gorgeous. I mean, it was a lovely thing to work with him. And the interesting thing about Phil is he used to open for the Style Council when he was a poet, when he was Porky the Poet. So Paul went, oh, Porky's done them. Oh, brilliant. So it feels like a project that, you know, it has a real sense of its own, what it is, I guess.
Yeah, no, I've Phil's been here and done Porky the Poet.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. You, in fact, I mean, let's just jump into that. The opening for a music act is something you did actually do. You mentioned it in here. I've got the notes here. You opened for 999, which weirdly, that's my wife's favourite band. She's a couple of years older than me, so all over 999.
Well,
describe doing that. I mean, that's.
Do you know, it was at Nottingham Rock City, and I have no idea how I got the gig. I just have none at all. But I found myself walking out in front of about 200 punks who were waiting for 999, and they all sat on the floor and watched me do a gig for 20 minutes. And then I went, please welcome 999, and they launched into Homicide, and it was it was hilarious, but it was fine. I mean, it's weird. I don't have that much of a connection with the music world in terms of gigging. You know, that's the only gig I've done really with a band, as far as I know. But yes, I did do that. I did mention that in the book, did I? Right.
It was very funny. In fact, some of the stories, honestly, I was crying with laughter. I think, which one? Let's talk about one. Dexys Midnight Runners. When anyone seen The Bridge?
Hang on, Kev. I'll ask. Has anyone seen A Bridge? My friend Warren is a very, very funny guy. I mean, Warren and Simon, who are the two mates that I talk about a lot, we went in 2016. We went to the Somerset House, had a sort of Jam exhibition, and we went along. And it was full of men our age and women, but a lot of men our age, little tubbier, little greyer, or a lot greyer. And but it was lovely to relieve that time. And we used to go to a lot of music gigs, and we loved Dexys Midnight Runners. I mean, hey, that first album is one of my favourite albums. But Kevin was a little bit up his own backside. So when he's got one note playing on the keyboard and he's going, can anyone see The Bridge? Warren couldn't resist. And it was a very, very funny moment. Kevin didn't find it amusing at all. But there you go.
But the band were laughing.
Oh, everyone was laughing. I mean, the theatre was laughing. It was great.
So you guys were up on the balcony.
Yes.
And he's saying, anyone seen The Bridge? And from what I understand, Warren he shouted to the rest of the people in the balcony, have you seen The Bridge? Anyone seen The Bridge?
No, but it was hold on, Kev, I'll ask. As Kevin goes, has anyone seen The Bridge? Can you see The Bridge? Right? And Warren, hold on, Kev, I'll ask. And then he went loudly, anyone seen The Bridge up here? Anyone? No, Kev, no bridge, mate. Can't see a bridge. I mean, it was extremely funny. But Warren and Simon are both funny boys. And we had a lot of fun hanging out and going to gigs.
Did they try stand up themselves? Were they? Because I know they forced you into it on one occasion.
Oh, well, Simon did, yeah. Simon is one of my oldest friends. I've known him since I was about 12. And we used to go down to the Comedy Store when we were kids, when we were like 17, the original Comedy Store. And he put my name down for the audience spot without me knowing. And I got introduced, please welcome Ian Stone. And I died so badly. Of course I died. I was an idiot, 17-year-old drunken idiot. Simon, actually, I've done quite a lot of writing with Simon. He's written for TV shows that I've done, and he has done a gig or two, but it's not something that he's ever had the desire to do. Not really. No. And same with Warren. I know a lot of people who are funny, but they don't necessarily want to do stand-up. They don't have the aching need for gratification and the adulation of strangers on a nightly basis that I do. So, you know comedians. But, yeah, Warren and Simon are funny guys. And that, I wanted that to come across, really, the amount of laughs we had in there. So
it does, and it does come across. It absolutely does. It. You mentioned that little appearance at the Comedy Store. Don Ward, the legend Don Ward, he recognised you when you actually finally came back.
He did, yeah. It was very funny because I did the gig in 1980 or whenever it was, and died horribly. And then 10 years later, I came back for a proper open spot. When I was like, I want to be a comedian. And he said, "You've been here before." And I said, "Oh yeah, I used to come quite a lot in the early 80s." He went, No, you've been on stage before." I said, "Yeah, like once for about 3 minutes, and I got booed off." "How do you remember that?" And he goes, "The nose. I remember the nose." And I thought, yeah, fair enough.
Fantastic. Right, I think what we should do is go back to the pre-John Peel Ian Stone, the one before you heard that. What was the song he played?
In the City.
In the City. Yeah. So you essentially, from what you've said in here, you were sort of a little bit out on a limb, a little bit rudderless in many ways, and in you saw the light basically with the Jam. That's the case?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want it. It wasn't a spiritual experience, right? It wasn't like Jake and Elwood at the back of the church in the Blues Brothers, and suddenly the band. It wasn't that, but when you hear a bit of music that blows you away, right? I mean, there's so many. I remember hearing Heart of Glass for the first time and thinking, what is this? I remember hearing Cigarettes and Alcohol at the Comedy Store the first time that they played it over the PA before the show, and seeing everyone just going, what the hell is this? So I think music has a unique ability to do that to you. And especially when you're a kid. I was 14 years old. A lot of the 70s stuff, I mean, I quite like a bit of the glam rock. I like Sweet and Mud and what have you. I really did. But I was quite an angry kid. My parents weren't going through a particularly good time. So I used to shut myself away in my room and listen to a lot of music. And John Peel was the show that I used to listen to most of the time. But I was a bit rudderless, yeah. Yeah, I don't know, I find it very weird when you get 13 and 14-year-old kids who know who they are and what they want to be. I think that's unusual. I'm not saying I was weird in any sense. I think that was quite normal for kids of that age. But I genuinely didn't know much of anything. And then when I heard Paul Weller and the Jam, I suddenly thought, oh yeah, I can latch onto this, because this is a guy who's not that much older than me. He's only 5 years older than me, and he seems to be talking sense. So I'm gonna listen to that for a while.
Brilliant.
Plus the tunes, by the way. The tunes were great. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's got to be both, yeah? So
yeah. No, the power of I mean, In the City is a great song for any from the first album. It's a sort of, well, in my mind, it's a standout piece. I'm coming back to it sort of second, third time round when I got to it. But
yeah. Well, it's also, by the way, it's a song about police brutality. Now, growing up, Sweet or Supertramp or Yes did not do songs about police brutality. They weren't singing about social change and about injustice and about, those sort of serious issues. And then suddenly there's this guy playing this music that I like with that sort of anger and energy of it, but talking about stuff that matters. And that was a big thing for me as well.
Paul Weller was remarkable for someone so young to have
Yeah.
such a mature outlook on life.
Yeah, well, that was my feeling about it. You know, the songs that he wrote, he was only 6 years older than me, or 5 years older than me, but he was the first. He was an adult ostensibly, but he was the first adult I'd ever heard speaking or singing about anything that made me think, that's something that I can get on side with, really. And I'm not alone here. There's hundreds and thousands of kids who felt the same way.
So at that point, 14, you're wanting to invest your time and efforts and any money you've got in going to see them, going to do stuff, but you weren't allowed to. Is that fair to say? Your parents were sort of holding you back from that?
My dad was just doing his thing, right? But my mum, she was there, but you know, only physically. My mum thought it was dangerous. It was odd, really, because I would go to football every weekend. I was travelling around the country as a 13-year-old. I remember before this all started, going to watch Arsenal Football Club away from home in Bristol, in Stoke, in Derby, in Manchester.
13 on your own?
Yeah. And this was dangerous, really. This was dangerous to go, much more dangerous than going to see a gig. But I suppose it was a daytime thing. And my mother, I don't know what she thought, really. I don't think she realised quite how bad it was out there in terms of the football violence. But in general, I was aware enough not to get hurt too often. I got beaten up once, but it was nothing too serious. But she wouldn't let me go and see gigs. So, you know, I had to sort of teenager into it, really. I was moody for a year and a half, and she finally relented.
So you got there when you were 15. So, and you do talk about a few of your highlight gigs. I have to say, you being at the Rainbow for the last Sham 69 gig, that's extraordinary.
Yeah, well, that's what opens the book, and it's it was an extraordinary event. I mean, I don't want to. I can tell you about it, but it was an extraordinary event. The most violent thing I've ever seen. It was as I said, the one thing I will say, it was like a pub rock gig interspersed with a Nuremberg rally, right? If you can imagine such a thing.
No, I'm remembering. Anyway, I won't talk about it because you got to read the story actually. And so the thing that London was full of back then was great music venues.
Yeah.
And you talked about the Rainbow with Sham 69.
Yeah.
Your first jam gig was at Music Machine.
Yes, now Coco's, although sadly had a fire last year, but it's being rebuilt. The Lyceum, I saw the Clash at the Lyceum. There was a lot of small pub gigs, you know, the Nashville. There were loads of great little gigs around London.
I was reading it with envy, just watching. I mean, you saw U2 as a support band at the Marquee.
I did. I mean, we were big fans of the photos. This is myself and Simon, my mate, and we were big fans of the photos. They had a very beautiful lead singer called Wendy Wu, and they sang pretty good rock songs, but U2 was supporting them. And I got quite into U2. I've seen them quite a few times, but that was the first time. I saw all sorts of strange stuff, really, but I love live music. I mean, we're doing this interview Monday morning. Did you watch David Bowie last night on TV? I mean, how beautiful was that? It was one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. And I was meant to be at Glastonbury this weekend. I've been 6 times out of the last 10. I absolutely love live music. I love being there, and I'm trying in this book to capture that vibe of what it's like.
No, absolutely amazing. And dare I say it, how cheap it was back then. I mean, we had...
it was cheap.
Round here, I don't know if you remember or whether you came out to Aylesbury, we had Friars. Friars was a club that ran probably from the late 60s, and it hosted everyone. David Bowie, you mentioned him, he launched Ziggy Stardust in Aylesbury.
If the Jam played there, I may well have gone there. I went to a lot of Jam gigs.
I did actually make a note last night. I was just checking. The Jam played 4 times.
Yeah, I may well have gone. I mean, there's a lot I can't remember about the gigs. I know I went to Poole and Birmingham and Manchester, But Aylesbury would have been one that I would have thought, well, that's not far away. We can get
That's
the
an
train
easy
out
one,
there.
straight on the Metropolitan line. The so they played 77, 78, 79 and 80.
Yeah, I would have gone to some of those tours, definitely.
And Friars had a different phases and stuff, but when their phase 3 finished and closed, when they knocked the Civic Centre down, Paul Weller actually played that night. That was in 2010, which I was able to get to, actually, amazingly. And
Did you do any jam stuff?
I did. I looked through the set list for jam stuff, and 6 tunes: Strange Town, Pretty Green, Start, Art School, which is from the first album.
I love Art School. Love that tune.
Scrape Away, and it finished with, and there's a copy of the set list, which was the one Paul had on stage, and he just had Malice at the end, last one, Malice. Which,
do you know what? 6. I mean, I saw him last year in Greenwich at the Royal Naval College open air gig, and he only did it. He did a couple of jam songs. 6 is a lot actually for him to do, because he does tend. He's always been one of these guys that looks forward, really. Next, and he's obviously got an amazing back catalogue anyway. But yeah, those tunes. I mean, they're great tunes, aren't they? So
I was struck because I thought I'd quickly go through his set list, and I didn't. I expected to find a couple. Yeah, but I think the enormity of the event, to see the end of Friars, as it was a big thing, particularly because the Jam had played there so many times.
Well, I think those music venues are so precious. You know, I mean, it's a bit like now with the coronavirus thing going on and the theatres, and we may well lose them for good. And these places, they have that history coming out of the walls. You know, the Rainbow Theatre hosted almost every major music act that's ever been around. Michael Jackson was there, all sorts of people. Queen, I saw Queen there in '79, and now it's a Christian. Oh, it's not fundamentalist, but it's a heavy Christian sort of thing going on there, and fine, it's a meeting house they call it, but it's such a great venue, and I think once these places are lost, that they're gone, and it's such a shame in a way when you think of all the amazing stuff that's gone on at these places.
Yeah. No, absolutely amazing. I can tell time is rattling on, so we've got I've got a ream of things we could touch on here. Let's briefly talk about your love of Liam Brady and Arsenal. I think that's I think that stood out. I have to say, I'm not an Arsenal. I'm actually a Leeds fan, so it's next season will be.
Yeah.
But yeah, Liam Brady, what a guy.
He was the first. I was a little young for Charlie George. I mean, I was aware of him when I was a kid, but I was a little young for Charlie. I remember him lying on the turf when I was 8 years old and we won the double. But Liam Brady was the first person I saw regularly play football. And I just loved the way he played. This skinny Irish kid, left-footed. And he was a beautiful footballer. And I worshipped him. Of course I did. We weren't that good in the mid-70s, and then he came along and we got a bit better and we won the cup in '79. And because going along parallel with me going to see the Jam all the time was watching Arsenal home and away. So that was really that was my way of getting out of the house and being part of something. You know what I mean? I mean, I talk about this in the book about being part of something. Yeah. And Paul Weller provided one thing, and the Arsenal and Liam Brady provided another. And that's all you want really as a teenager, I think. And I just love Liam Brady. I met him a couple of years ago at some dinner. We got quite drunk, actually. It was fantastic. It was just fantastic. People say, don't meet your heroes. It's nonsense. Meet them, and hopefully they'll be great.
Fantastic. And your dinner party guests, I suspect you'd have Paul Weller and Liam Brady, one on either side. That would blow your mind.
It'd be a bit much, wouldn't it, really? I wouldn't know what. No, not now, Paul. I'm talking to Liam about beating Tottenham 5-0. It would be weird. So, yeah, I loved the way he played. Of course I did. Of course.
Brilliant. So, honestly, I've got a stream of notes. I could have gone through all of this. The book is so much fun. Honestly, so many brilliant laugh out loud bits, and your memory of your school years is remarkable. I can't remember anything, frankly. So,
really,
Mr. Waterman's bag, and
Well. I'll be honest with you, Mr. Waterman's Bag, that was a story that I told on stage sometimes. So that was in my head a little bit. But weirdly, considering some of my behaviour, let's say, over the last 20 years, my memory is reasonably well intact. And I'm quite surprised at that. I mean, God knows how much I'd remember if I hadn't misbehaved. But yeah, once you start doing a project like this, you think to yourself, I'll never remember any of this. But when you dig deep enough, you think, oh yeah, there was that story. And then you just write it down and suddenly you've got another 1,000 words and there it is. But yeah, my school years were quite vivid to me. Not because I was particularly happy, but just because they were quite vivid time. Tell me,
there was the moment, and people were reading the book about kicking a girl up the bum, which is, it may sound a bit harsh, like that, but it's a very funny story. Did you check that you could publish that story with her? Did you know her still, or?
I haven't seen her for a long time. She might not even recognise herself. I don't know. She probably will. I changed her name anyway.
You didn't put. You know what? You very carefully. I did check this. You didn't put any name in.
Did I not?
There's no.
Actually, you're right. I think we talked about it and decided best not to. Briefly, there was a very big girl, and I don't mean she was fat. She was just big. She was bigger than all of us, and she used to push us all around. And I was in the first year, so I'm 11. You know, I'm a little kid, little schnip, and she was carrying a load of books, and she dropped them, and she told me to pick some up or something, and as she bent over to do whatever, her backside was big. There's no getting away from it. And I kicked it. I just gave her a kick up the bum because all the indignities and injustices that I'd suffered, and I kicked, and she went sprawling across the corridor, and the books went everywhere. But what I remember most about that moment was the kid opposite me looking at me in open-mouthed awe and horror. What have you done? Well, I ran. She ran after me. And I went and hid in the boys' toilet, thinking that she wouldn't come in. And she burst in, knocked the door down, and beat me up, actually. And I got suspended, and she got suspended. But after that, she was fine with me. She used to sort of nod at me afterwards. She must have thought I was mad. So, I'll avoid him anyway. Yeah, it was a strange moment. I don't know what came over me, but sometimes you've got to kick an enormous backside, haven't you?
Exactly. So, well, we've got to our time now, Ian. I'm so sorry. I could honestly talk for hours. Let me give you a summary of some of the things that we didn't talk about. I mean, actually, no, the bonnet of the car. Weirdly, I did an interview with Arthur Smith last week for our YouTube channel, and he had the same the car bonnet experience of nearly dying, as did I. It's almost like everyone has to have it, do they?
What, riding on the bonnet of a car and getting thrown off? I mean, well, it's amazing we survived into our 30s and 40s, isn't it, really, frankly?
Exactly.
But yes, that did happen to me. I hope that people can connect with the stories and connect with, I mean, somebody said to me, it's not even, my sister actually, a friend of hers, read it and said, if you change the Jam for Depeche Mode and change North London for South East London, that was my life and my upbringing. And I thought, that's what I want, really. I want people to connect with the stories and have those same feelings that we all had.
I certainly think in terms of your age group, I mean, you could go and see Queen or David Bowie for 60p or something, 75p.
Amazing.
I mean, it's a very different world now.
Yeah.
Which I can only look back with envy, frankly, because by the time I was going to gigs, it was proper money by then. And
we were lucky. We were lucky. I mean, I had 5 nights once at the Rainbow Theatre where I saw the Jam 3 times, the Police and Queen in a row. I mean, it's 5 nights in a row. It's utterly ridiculous. And I just, in some ways I did grow up at the right time. But let's not forget how terrible it was in the 70s. And Paul Wellard's not the only one who said that.
Yes. Okay. Brilliant. So thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Ben.
To Be Someone. Obviously, he's available in our bookshop. We've got a few copies in. So, and at some point, it'd be nice to get you here, maybe sign a few as well, and Perhaps do a proper book event, but
Do you know what? That would be lovely. If the government will allow it, I'm definitely happy to do that.
brilliant, brilliant. Thank you for your time, and
Pleasure,
we'll see you very soon.
Stay safe, mate.
Massive thanks to Ian for that wonderful interview. His book, To Be Someone, is available in our bookshop. Give us a call on 01442 827 653. All the other purchase blurb is available in the text below the video. So we've got so many more interviews to come, lots more interviews already recorded and others to do. We are always looking for people willing to be interviewers as well. So if you fancy having a little chat with somebody in particular, do give us a shout, and we can make that happen. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.